My beloved child. The clock on the wall read 11:54. Only 6 minutes remained before midnight. The room was silent except for the steady ticking of the old clock. Every second sounded louder than the one before, as though time itself wanted to be heard. Daniel sat alone in the darkness, exhausted by years of disappointment. Bills covered the kitchen table. His phone had stopped ringing weeks ago. The friends who once promised to stay had quietly disappeared. His dreams seemed farther away than ever. He looked out the rain-covered window and whispered, "God, if you're listening, I don't know how much longer I can keep going." The words vanished into the quiet night. Nothing happened. Or so he thought. A sudden breeze moved through the room although every window was closed. The candle on the table flickered without going out. The silence changed into something deeper, not frightening, but powerful. Daniel closed his eyes. In that stillness, he imagined a calm, courageous presence, like the traditional stories that describe Archangel Michael as a symbol of strength, protection, and hope. The voice he imagined did not thunder. It came gently. My beloved child, do not let fear become your master. Every storm has convinced you that you are abandoned, but hope has not left you. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He could not explain why those words felt so real inside his heart. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, something began to change. For years he had chased success without asking whether he was becoming the person he wanted to be. Every setback had convinced him he was forgotten. But perhaps his story was not over. The clock ticked again. 5 minutes remained. Daniel remembered the little church his grandmother used to take him to every Sunday. She would always smile and say, "Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to move forward while trusting that light is greater than darkness." As a child he believed every word. As an adult he had forgotten. He covered his face with both hands. "What if it's too late?" he whispered. In the silence another thought came to him. It is never too late to choose hope. The sentence did not erase his problems. His debts remained. His loneliness remained. The uncertainty remained. But something inside him became stronger than the fear surrounding him. Across the city, thousands of people were experiencing struggles they never spoke about. A nurse finishing a double shift prayed for strength. A father searched for work after months of rejection. A young woman wondered if anyone would ever understand her pain. An elderly man sat beside a hospital bed, hoping tomorrow would bring better news. Every person carried an unseen battle. Yet every person also carried the possibility of hope. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin quietly. Not with dramatic signs, but with the decision to keep going one more day. 4 minutes remained. Daniel stood up. He walked toward the mirror. The reflection staring back looked tired. But behind the exhaustion he noticed something else. Determination. For the first time in months he spoke words of encouragement instead of defeat. "I will not let today define the rest of my life." The room remained silent. Yet those simple words echoed louder than every fear that had haunted him. Meanwhile, the storm outside slowly began to calm. Clouds drifted apart. Moonlight broke through. Daniel remembered another lesson from his grandmother. Darkness never wins by being stronger. It only exists until light arrives. He smiled through tears. Maybe tonight was not the end. Maybe tonight was the beginning. 3 minutes remained. Suddenly the electricity went out. The apartment became completely dark. Daniel froze. For a brief moment, fear returned. Then he remembered the candle still burning on the table. Its tiny flame illuminated the room. One small light was enough to push back the darkness. He couldn't help but see the symbolism. Hope often begins as a single flame. Protect it. Feed it. Never underestimate it. Daniel opened the old Bible that had belonged to his grandmother. Inside was a handwritten note. It simply read, "When life tells you to quit, remember that tomorrow has not yet been written. Walk with courage, love generously, forgive freely, and never lose hope." His hands trembled. He had forgotten that note was there. It arrived at exactly the moment he needed it most. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps life has a way of placing forgotten encouragement before us when we are finally ready to receive it. 2 minutes remained. Daniel knelt beside the chair. He didn't ask for wealth. He didn't ask for fame. He simply prayed. "Give me the strength to become the person I was created to be. Help me face tomorrow with courage." As he stood again, the burden on his shoulders seemed lighter, not because every problem had disappeared, but because he no longer believed he had to face them alone. Outside, the first stars appeared between the clouds. A fresh wind carried away the last drops of rain. The city remained unaware that somewhere, in one small apartment, a broken heart had begun to heal. Sometimes the greatest victories are invisible. They happen long before anyone else notices. My beloved child. Only 1 minute remained before midnight. The apartment was still, yet Daniel felt as though everything inside him had awakened. The fear that had ruled his heart for years had not disappeared completely, but it no longer stood alone. Beside it now was something stronger, hope. He took a slow breath and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The streets shimmered beneath the moonlight, and for the first time in a long while, he noticed the beauty that had been there all along. A thought settled into his mind, inspired by the enduring image of Archangel Michael as a guardian of courage. The greatest battles are not fought with swords. They are fought in the human heart. Daniel understood. His greatest enemy had never been poverty. It had never been failure. It had never been rejection. His greatest enemy had been the quiet voice that whispered every day, "You are not enough." Tonight, he decided that voice would no longer define him. As midnight approached, memories flooded back. He remembered the dreams he had buried because others laughed at them. He remembered opportunities he had ignored because fear convinced him he would fail. He remembered the people he had loved but never forgiven, and the heavy burden that resentment had placed on his soul. Each memory felt like another chain. Yet one by one, he imagined those chains breaking, not through magic, but through a choice to let go. He whispered, "I cannot change yesterday, but I can choose tomorrow." Across the city, unseen stories unfolded. A teacher stayed late preparing lessons for students who needed encouragement more than grades. A firefighter returned home after a difficult shift, grateful for another day. A young mother rocked her child to sleep, praying for strength she wasn't sure she possessed. None of them knew Daniel. Yet all of them shared the same unseen struggle, the choice between surrendering to fear or moving forward with courage. Hope has a remarkable way of connecting strangers. The old candle continued to burn. Its flame was smaller now, yet it still refused to go out. Daniel smiled. "So that's what courage looks like," he said softly. "Not the absence of wind, but the decision to keep burning despite it." Those words stayed with him. His phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from an old friend he had not spoken to in years. "I don't know why, but I was thinking about you tonight. I hope you're okay." Daniel stared at the screen. A few hours earlier, he would have ignored it. Instead, he replied, "Thank you. I'm trying to be." Sometimes healing begins with two simple words, "I'm trying." Midnight. No thunder shook the earth. No heavens opened. The world outside continued as it always had. But inside Daniel, a new chapter quietly began. He realized that transformation rarely arrives with spectacle. More often, it begins with a single decision, to keep walking, to keep believing, and to keep choosing kindness even when life is difficult. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window. Daniel woke feeling different. Not because his problems had vanished. His bills were still on the table. His job search still awaited him. His future remained uncertain. But he rose from bed with purpose. He cleaned his apartment. He organized his papers. He updated his resume. He called people he had been afraid to contact. Each small action became a declaration. "I refuse to let despair write the ending of my story." Later that afternoon, Daniel passed the little church his grandmother had loved. He paused outside. The doors were open. Inside, the sanctuary was quiet. He sat in the last row and closed his eyes. He didn't ask for miracles. He simply thanked God for giving him another day to try again. As he left, sunlight broke through the stained glass windows, filling the room with vibrant colors. Daniel smiled. Sometimes the light was there all along. He had simply forgotten to look up. Far beyond what Daniel could see, life continued to present opportunities, new friendships, unexpected conversations, doors waiting to open. He didn't know which ones would matter. Neither do we. That is why hope is so powerful. It reminds us that tomorrow holds possibilities we cannot yet imagine. As evening fell, Daniel walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. He looked upward and whispered, "I don't know what comes next, but I will meet it with courage." The wind carried his words into the night. And somewhere deep within, the fear that had once shouted now became only a whisper. Because hope had finally found its voice. My beloved child. Every sunrise carries a question. Will you allow yesterday's fears to decide today's choices? Daniel stood at his apartment window as the first light spread across the city. The same streets, the same buildings, and the same responsibilities waited for him. Yet something inside him had changed. He no longer expected life to become easy overnight. Instead, he had chosen to meet each challenge with courage. He remembered the image of Archangel Michael that had encouraged him the night before. Not as a promise that every obstacle would disappear, but as a reminder that strength often grows in the middle of life's hardest battles. He took a deep breath. Today, he whispered, I will keep moving forward. Daniel spent the morning applying for jobs. Some applications received no response. Others ended in polite rejection. Each rejection stung, but he refused to let it become his identity. Instead of saying, I have failed, he began saying, I am still learning. That small change in perspective gave him the strength to continue. On his way home, Daniel noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several heavy grocery bags. Without hesitation, Daniel walked over. May I help you? He asked. The man smiled warmly. I've been hoping someone would ask. They walked together for several blocks. The elderly man introduced himself as Mr. Thomas. As they talked, Mr. Thomas asked, Tell me, son. Why do you look like someone who has been carrying more than groceries? Daniel laughed quietly. I've been carrying fear. Mr. Thomas nodded. We all do at times. But fear grows heavier when we carry it alone. Those words stayed with Daniel long after they said goodbye. That evening, Daniel found an old notebook hidden in a drawer. Inside were dreams he had written years earlier. One page read, I want my life to encourage people who think they've lost hope. He stared at the sentence for a long time. When did I stop believing this was possible? He asked himself. Perhaps the dream had never disappeared. Perhaps it had simply been waiting for him to return. Days passed. Daniel continued choosing hope, one decision at a time. He woke early. He treated people with kindness. He stopped comparing his journey to everyone else's. He learned that progress is often quiet. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as patience. One afternoon, Daniel received a phone call. A company he had almost forgotten about invited him for an interview. His heart raced. It wasn't the perfect job. It wasn't the highest salary. But it was an opportunity. He smiled. Thank you, he whispered. The interview day arrived. As he waited outside the office, nervous thoughts returned. What if you're not good enough? For a brief moment, the old fear tried to take control. Then he remembered everything he had learned. Courage isn't pretending you're fearless. Courage is taking the next step even when fear is present. Daniel walked through the door. Head held high. Heart steady. The interview went well. Not perfectly, but honestly. When they asked about his greatest challenge, Daniel didn't pretend to have all the answers. He simply said, "I've learned that setbacks can either make us bitter or make us wiser. I'm choosing wisdom." The interviewers smiled. Authenticity spoke louder than perfection. That night, Daniel looked up at the stars once more. The journey wasn't over. There were still unanswered questions. Still prayers waiting. Still dreams unfolding. But he was no longer the man who had sat alone in darkness believing his story had ended. He had become someone who understood that hope is not found at the end of the journey. Hope walks beside us every step of the way. And somewhere beyond the horizon, a new chapter was already waiting. Daniel couldn't see it yet. But he no longer needed to. For the first time in years, he trusted that the path ahead, though uncertain, was worth walking. My beloved child, there will be moments when you believe you have come too far to turn back, yet not far enough to see the destination. Those moments do not mean you are lost. They mean you are still walking. Several days after the interview, Daniel waited anxiously for a phone call. Every ring of his phone made his heart race. Every email notification made him stop what he was doing. But no answer came. One day passed. Then another. Then an entire week. The old thoughts began to return. Maybe they found someone better. Maybe nothing is ever going to change. Fear knocked on the door of his heart once again. This time, however, Daniel did not invite it inside. Instead, he remembered the courage he had been building day by day. He quietly said, "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I will not surrender today." That afternoon, Daniel decided to visit the small park where his grandmother had often taken him as a child. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. Children laughed as they chased one another across the grass. An elderly couple sat on a bench, smiling as they watched the sunset. Life was moving forward. And Daniel realized something. While he had been waiting for one answer, he had forgotten to appreciate the blessings that already surrounded him. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Not because everything was perfect, but because hope had taught him to be grateful even in uncertainty. As evening approached, Daniel noticed a little girl sitting alone near a fountain. She was crying quietly. Her colorful balloon had slipped from her hand and floated high into the sky. Daniel walked over and sat beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She nodded through her tears. "I wanted to keep it forever." Daniel looked up at the balloon disappearing into the clouds. Then he smiled kindly. "My grandmother once told me something I'll never forget." The little girl wiped her eyes. "What did she say?" "Sometimes we lose one thing only to discover something even more beautiful waiting ahead." The little girl thought for a moment. Then she smiled. Maybe. Her parents soon arrived, relieved to find her safe. Before leaving, she waved at Daniel. "Thank you." As they disappeared down the path, Daniel realized that helping someone else had lifted his own spirit. Sometimes healing comes when we become a source of comfort for others. That night, a storm swept across the city. Thunder echoed through the streets. Rain beat against Daniel's window. For a moment, it reminded him of the night when everything had begun. He stood by the glass, watching flashes of lightning illuminate the sky. Then another thought came to him. One inspired by the enduring image of Archangel Michael as a symbol of steadfast courage. Storms do not last forever. But the strength you gain while walking through them can last a lifetime. Daniel smiled. He no longer feared the storm. He understood that every difficult season had been shaping his character. The next morning, his phone rang. He answered immediately. "Hello?" A cheerful voice spoke. "Good morning, Daniel. We're pleased to offer you the position." For a few seconds, he couldn't speak. Tears filled his eyes. He had imagined this moment many times. Yet when it finally arrived, it felt quieter than he expected. Not because it was less meaningful, but because the greatest victory had happened long before the phone call. The real victory was the transformation inside his heart. The job was simply one of the many blessings that followed. Daniel accepted the offer with gratitude. His financial problems would not disappear overnight. There was still hard work ahead. There would still be difficult days. But now he faced them with confidence instead of despair. He remembered the frightened man who had once stared at the clock, believing only 6 minutes remained before everything was lost. Now he understood. Those 6 minutes had never been about the end. They had been about the beginning. On his first day at work, Daniel carried a small folded note inside his wallet. It was his grandmother's handwritten message. "When life tells you to quit, remember that tomorrow has not yet been written. Walk with courage, love generously, forgive freely, and never lose hope." He read it once. Folded it carefully. Smiled. And walked through the door with quiet confidence. He had learned that true courage is not loud. It is the steady decision to keep moving forward, even when the future cannot yet be seen. Far above the city, dawn painted the sky with shades of gold and crimson. A new day had arrived. New opportunities waited. New lives would cross Daniel's path. And the greatest chapter of his journey was still ahead. Because hope is never the destination. It is the faithful companion that walks beside us until we discover who we were always meant to become. My beloved child. If you have walked through every chapter of this journey, remember this one truth. No night lasts forever. No storm can hold back the sunrise forever. And no life is beyond the reach of hope when a person chooses faith, love, courage, and perseverance. Months passed. Daniel settled into his new job. It wasn't perfect. Some days were tiring, and unexpected challenges still came. But he faced them differently now. He no longer measured his life by how many problems he had. Instead, he measured it by how much kindness, gratitude, and courage he carried through those problems. His apartment slowly changed too. The pile of unpaid bills became smaller. The silence that once felt lonely was replaced by peaceful evenings spent reading, praying, writing, and calling family members he had neglected for years. Most importantly, Daniel became the kind of person his grandmother had always believed he could become. One Saturday morning, he returned to the small park where he had once comforted the little girl who had lost her balloon. This time, he carried a notebook. Over the next few years, Daniel volunteered at community centers, helping people prepare resumes, practice for interviews, and rebuild confidence after difficult seasons. He never claimed to have all the answers. He simply listened. Sometimes, listening was the greatest gift he could offer. People often asked him what had changed his life. He never spoke of dramatic miracles or instant success. Instead, he would quietly say, "It began the day I stopped believing that fear should make my decisions." One evening, Daniel visited his grandmother's grave. He placed fresh flowers beside the headstone and sat quietly. The wind moved gently through the trees. Birds sang in the distance. With a grateful smile, he whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward with hope." Though she was no longer there to hear his words, her wisdom lived on through the way he treated others. In that sense, love had outlived loss. Years later, Daniel became known in his community as someone people could turn to in difficult times. Not because his life had become perfect, but because he had learned how to remain compassionate through hardship. One rainy evening, a young woman knocked on the door of the community center where he volunteered. She looked exhausted. "I don't know if anyone can help me," she said softly. Daniel invited her inside. He made her a warm cup of tea and simply listened. As she shared her fears, Daniel recognized the same hopelessness he had once carried. When she finished speaking, he smiled gently and said, "There was a time when I believed I had only 6 minutes left before everything fell apart. I later discovered those 6 minutes were actually the beginning of my healing. Your story isn't over either." For the first time that evening, she smiled. It was a small smile. But sometimes a small smile is the first sign that hope has returned. As the years passed, Daniel's hair turned gray, but his heart remained full of gratitude. He often looked at the old clock that still hung on his wall. It continued ticking faithfully, just as it had on the night that changed his life. Every time he heard it, he remembered an important lesson. Time is precious. Not because it tells us when life will end, but because every new minute is another opportunity to forgive, to love, to serve, and to begin again. One clear morning, as the sun rose over the city, Daniel stood at his window. The same window. The same sky. Yet everything was different. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you for every closed door that taught me patience. Thank you for every disappointment that strengthened my character. Thank you for every person who showed me kindness. And thank you for every new day." The sunlight filled the room. The old candle still rested on the table, now unlit but carefully preserved as a reminder that even the smallest light can guide someone through the darkest night. If this story leaves you with one message, let it be this. Life will bring moments of uncertainty. There will be days when fear seems louder than hope. There will be storms you cannot avoid. But storms do not have the final word. Choose kindness when anger seems easier. Choose forgiveness when resentment feels tempting. Choose perseverance when giving up appears comfortable. And choose hope, even when you cannot yet see the outcome. The enduring image of Archangel Michael has long inspired many people as a symbol of courage, protection, and standing firm in the face of darkness. Let that symbolism remind you that bravery is found not in never struggling, but in continuing to walk forward with faith and integrity. Remember, every sunrise is a new beginning. Every setback can become a lesson. Every act of compassion changes the world, even if only one life at a time. And every minute you are given is another chance to become the person you were created to be. So when life whispers, "It's too late," answer with confidence. As long as there is breath in me, there is hope. And with that hope, Daniel's story, and the stories of everyone he encouraged, continued, one day at a time, proving that the brightest dawn often follows the darkest night. The end.